Since the late 90s, Shawn Tuma has been working with legal departments and security teams at the intersection of law and technology. This has given him a unique perspective for how these important defenders work well together and do not work well together, and what a difference that can make with how their organizations manage cyber risk. This led him to write a book called the GC+CISO Connection to help start a dialogue and strengthen the partnership between these critically important roles. The next step is to bring together people who understand these roles to share their experiences and continue the dialogue. Because none of us have all the answers, it is through conversations like these that we can all improve how we work together to improve cyber resilience. This is the GC+CISO Connection Show.
Hello and welcome to the GC+CISO Connection Show. I'm your host, Shawn Tuma. Today I have joining me one of my really good friends and a very special guest of this show, CISO extraordinaire, and the host of the Professional CISO Show, my good friend David Malicoat.
Thanks for having me, Shawn. Number one, I'm thrilled to just have a small part in what you're doing here, and that you would invite me on. And just behind the scenes for everybody, obviously we just recorded my show with you on it. Now that you're a regular guest, because I think having legal legal guidance for CISOs is huge, and so you're going to have a recurring on my show. So thrilled to be here. Well,
I can tell you, I see a recurring role for you here as well. But for those of you who may not know, it's because of David and his show really that was the impetus for me to start this show. Because back during the summer when I was in the middle of writing the book here, David invited me onto his show, and of course I'm sitting there thinking, oh Lord, I can't even get this book written. I don't have time to go do a show, but I'm not going to pass this up because it's a great opportunity, and honestly I just felt it inside that I needed to go. And so I was about midway through the book. I was struggling at a point where I needed some motivation and encouragement, and so I went and recorded the Professional CISO Show with David, and along the way thought, you know what, this would be a really cool thing to start doing as a podcast show as well. And David was very encouraging and supportive, and here we are, David.
Well, I think first, congratulations on the book. From my perspective, I think it's much needed as a CISO, and I talked to a lot of my colleagues, obviously on the show and off, and I think having that resource from somebody that's in the seat as far as your role as an attorney, having been being and having been with a lot of folks around GCs and CISOs, you see that need. Perfect time, perfect place, right?
Wow.
So I think that's the key, and I having read it, invaluable.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, David, and thank you for all you've done for me, for us, the community,
Appreciate
and the
that.
show. So you mentioned your role as a CISO.
Yep.
So despite all the work you're putting into the Professional CISO, you have a day job.
I do.
So tell the audience a little bit about what you do, your day job, and kind of how you got to that, and maybe any critical lessons you've learned along the way. Give us your story.
Yeah, so the story, well, I'll start early, which is Marine Corps veteran.
Yeah.
I think that has fundamentally shaped me of how I am today relative to leadership, approach to the world, planning for sure. If you talk to any military member, they'll say planning is a big piece of that. And so when I got out, didn't have a choice, actually. I blew up my ankle, and the way we were now having to be a civilian because I had planned on making a career out of the military. And but immediately into IT. And so Unix systems administrator by trade back in the early days, and a backup administrator. And I think that, we talk about resiliency, and you talk about the idea of disaster recovery was heavy in that. So, and as a Unix guy, Unix person, it's one of those where you go, that there's some fundamentals there and how that operating system works, that you get some great fundamentals when it comes to security as well. And so did the technical role for a long time. For those of you in the Dallas area, Pro Systems, I worked there, and they got acquired by Dell, so I was kind of 5 years on each side of that deal, and went into the leadership track where I was doing more account leadership, delivery leadership. I was delivering security services. I was delivering IT services. I was delivering IT service management services, and got to the point where I kind of became a fixer, is the best way I can put it. And with the fixer, it's about coming in. There may be some trouble, whether it be people, process, technology on any given account. Go in, help fix that, given the authority to go ahead and fix it and make it run smoother. Then I found out consulting.
Yeah.
And I became a road warrior for about 5 years. And I was out on Monday, back on Thursday, always on a plane, doing that kind of thing. Worked all around the country. People say you get experience in dog years when it comes to doing something like that, which is very true. Loved my time doing it, even though there was challenges around it, logistically, let's say. But when that finished up, because I had given myself 5 years, and right about the 5-year mark, I was ready to move on. I actually started my own MSSP. And and so small, horrible timing, because like the last week of February of 2020 is when I got all my back-end contracts in place and all that, and I had like 3 customers. And then turn around and COVID hit the next week, basically. Yeah. And I had 3 customers for about the next 2 years because nobody's spending money, right? Yeah. And wound up selling that. And then through the process was doing some independent consulting, which is how I landed at my current company, Direct Marketing Solutions, out of Portland, Oregon. I always tell folks we handle about in excess of 80 billion pieces of PII a year.
Wow.
Typically from the 3 credit bureaus plus other sources as well, independent lists that the customers hold. But in the end, it's marketing, right? Yeah. So a lot of PII, but it's a lot of it's single use as well, where it's you get the data, you use it for that marketing campaign, and then you toss it. Yeah. And so that's why it's so much volume there.
That's so important, David, because one of the things I preach is data governance.
Yes.
Your data management. And the most effective tool that I talk about all the time is your data destruction process.
100%.
And if you don't have it, you don't have to answer for it.
And the good news for us is it is written into our contracts. And so, back to the legal side of things, I'm heavy into the legal side of things. Every time we bring on a customer, I do legal review, right, from a security perspective, and privacy now, because now I have privacy as well. And so, but I was brought in as their first CISO. And initially it was a contract, and then got hired on. Great folks, great culture, growing company. My mandate was to grow this to a level of maturity that allowed us to be the best in the business, in our industry when it came to cybersecurity, and that's been our goal.
That's a really great differentiator these days.
Correct.
Because supply chain third-party risk is such a huge component of every business's risk profile. And if they know that their business partners are doing a good job, that's one less issue they have to worry about.
Right, and I can say the progress was strong and is strong. The team, shout out to my team for sure, done a great job in continually tracking that maturity, right? Because yes, you can do it, but do you do it well?
Yeah.
Do you do it at the level better than you did the day before?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
It's that improvement. We're never going to reach perfection.
Correct.
But we're trying to constantly mature.
Shouldn't stop us from trying.
Exactly. No, that's our goal. That's our goal. So speaking of excellence and shooting for excellence, tell our listeners about the Professional CISO Show.
Yeah, so my journey on that, if you'll give me a little bit of latitude.
Absolutely.
Last May, Tim Brown, the CISO SolarWinds, now the CISO SolarWinds, was not when all this happened. He received a Wells notice from the SEC. And for those of you that are not familiar with Wells notice, basically it's a notification you're going to get in trouble pretty much without telling you exactly what you're getting in trouble for, other than, obviously they've been doing an investigation of some sort. And so when I saw that, I was like, that does not make me comfortable as a CISO, even though I'm at a privately held company, because you never know where you're going to be next, or you don't, a lot of times the trickle down effect as well. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go on a journey of just self-improvement. I think that's more around like my military background as well. Like when I see something out of whack, I'm going to go aggressively attack that thing and see how much I can get myself better to get in front of it.
When you're saying this, I'm reminded of one of my favorite memes about Marines, and it's where it shows like this labyrinth and it's like how everybody else goes through it, and it shows the Marine just going straight through it.
Not.
I love that.
We are taught that for sure. I will say, sometimes to our own detriment, but we a lot of times people have to worry about learning the aggressive side of things or the get stuff done side of things. That's not our problem. A lot of times it's the soft skills for us. And I'm reminded. I mean, I haven't been in since 1999, and even to this day, people are like, a little more soft skills. Not bad, but sometimes I'm just let's go right at it. And so I did, and the journey was this. I went and books, articles, found out those were not really, there weren't quick turnaround. And nothing against books, of course. I think that one is definitely going to live for a long time. But it's more about, this is a subject matter that was developing rapidly. Yeah. So I landed on podcast, and I have found basically during that time that in cybersecurity, podcasts are kind of captive, and it's around the sponsorship aspect. So, and I appreciate what everybody's doing. Don't get me wrong. This is not a trashing of the people doing the work, because they've done great work, and I have learned from them. But I thought there was a way to be more effective. And so in the end, as I got to the end, and I'll give a shout out because somebody as well, my mentor, I had a conversation with him. His name's Robert Pace.
Oh, yeah.
Episode 1 of the
Robert's
CISO
coming on this show.
Oh,
We've
absolutely.
already talked about it.
Oh, no doubt about it. And full of wisdom, of course. And it was supposed to be a 15-minute check-in as my mentor. And I turn around, and an hour and a half later, after getting off the phone, and I said, man, I wish I could have recorded that conversation because it was so dynamic. It was back and forth. It was, and it wasn't mentor to mentee. It was really, it felt, it was just robust. And I was like, I wish I could have recorded that and put it out to the world. And then about 5 minutes later, it dawned on me that's called a podcast. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And it immediately, my brain went, no. That is not that's not your deal. Because I've never been one to seek the spotlight.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Exactly, right? It's one of those where you immediately go, I don't know if I want to do that. But then turn around and talking with folks, and I think I went somewhere and recorded like a customer testimonial, and you start getting people saying, no, you're actually pretty decent at this. You might want to think about that. And then in turn, pair that with nobody's doing it the way we're doing it, and if I did it the way we're doing it, we're able to cycle faster through this thought process. Or the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, as the military member. Usually that's Air Force, but okay. I kid. But we get through our OODA loop faster, right? We get through that thought process faster. And I thought that the calling to me was we need to do that in cybersecurity. We need to get in front of these things. I'm not the only one with that problem, right? I wanted to get in front of it, and so as it developed, long story short. Dropped our first episode in February. I think we're sitting at 41 this week. I had the privilege of interviewing Joe Sullivan, which former CSO of Uber.
Oh, that was amazing.
Live studio audience here at the Real News PR. And what an amazing experience, right? And so in 9 months, we've grew like I had never anticipated. I thought this was going to be a passion project and just to get the word out there. Some people will listen, some people won't. You won't, we're reaching about 22,000 people a week across all of our platforms, which is crazy.
That's amazing. The story you're describing is very familiar because it's kind of the same struggles I've dealt with. And I love the podcast community. And look, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't even probably have the presence I have in the security community were it not for my friend Raph Los and the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. They've had me on since I think 2013 or 14, and it's what you describe. It's like, hey, we don't need to overplan this. Here's some key issues. Let's go talk about them. Right. And we'd talk about them. And I always wanted to start a podcast to do that, just to take all the formality away and to just jump into the substance and have the conversations. When I was writing the book, I struggled so much with wanting to address current topics, knowing it doesn't live long, versus trying to lay down some basic principles to where it's not valuable as a reference book on what do today's laws say about X, Y, Z, right? Because you can't keep up with that. But the goal ended up being, hey, let's have something to start the conversations. And then when you and I talked about it, it's like, well, wait a minute. Let's have these conversations then through a podcast form. And that's really how this came about. And
Well,
why.
I would say, the book is the foundation, right? And all we do is sit here and build upon that and build upon it in a different context depending upon what's going on. Like what we just recorded with the Professional CISO Show, we talked about like insurance and things like that. That's changed. That's changed since you published that book.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, but to have that foundation to go back to always, like I said, I feel like it's going to live a long time. And then this is the medium where people are going to begin and continue to get their relevant, timely information.
I hope that is the case. And, as we were talking, I'm thinking, I do want you to be a regular part of this show as well. And I have a selfish reason for that, is as I'm listening and watching the conversations you're having, I'm thinking of Joe Rogan. And Joe Rogan is becoming one of the smartest people in the world.
I agree.
Because he's sitting in a chair having conversations with really smart people for hours and hours a day. You're learning through that process. Joe is. And you're now doing that with the CISO community. You're sitting in this chair gathering the perspectives and insights of some of the most brilliant minds in the CISO community. And by the way, you've got the hair of Joe also.
Well,
so, you got a head start.
I did have a head start for sure. He had hair more recent than I did. It's been over a decade for me, so.
But David, what this is doing is giving you not only your own perspective on many of the issues we talk about, which it's legal and cyber collaboration. How do they work together? So you've got your insight from your role in the chair of a CISO, but you are learning now from ultimately hundreds or thousands of people eventually.
Well, I think the interesting thing for me, one is just first out of the gate, it's been such a privilege, like to sit with all these folks, not just some. And I think the approach being, because I had somebody ask me the other day, like, well, who's your target, interview? And I'm like, I want to talk to everybody, literally, because I know you could be in a conversation the other day. It was a medium-sized credit union. There's some specific things around a medium-sized credit union that nobody else has to deal with, but maybe translatable, right? Maybe it's interesting to hear that perspective, as well as the large financial organization, as well as the medium-sized, marketing agency or company. So I think there's a lot of traction there with the variety that we get to have. And to speak directly to what you're talking about, not just the privilege, but yes, I am definitely smarter by sitting and having these conversations. You get smarter by the nature of, hey, I have to ask these people questions.
Yeah.
And am I up for that? Am I bringing my best, right? What kind of unique questions can I ask to draw out the best from my guest, right? That the audience wants to hear. The goal of the show has always been, from the very beginning, I want actionable takeaways that people can, when they're listening, they go, oh, I didn't think about that. Or, oh, man, that's a good thing that I can plow into tomorrow, 2 weeks from now, or just the way that I progress my career. And then I think finally in the Rogan-esque style, for sure, it is I want a wide breadth, because I don't always agree with what people are saying. And you want to talk about bias, right?
Yeah.
To be able to sit and think about, I'll give you an example, zero trust. I have my position on it, but is that what I'm trying to communicate? Or am I going to bring both sides of the zero trust, debate potentially, and bring it to bear? That way everybody gets to hear and they can formulate their own opinion. I don't want to be a mouthpiece for one thing or another. Right? What I want to do is I want to dig into these topics and be able to pull these things out, flesh them out, and get in front of people. That way they can have their own informed decision, right? Or informed way of going about their business.
Yeah, and that's really the same goal I had with the book was, I'm not a CISO and I'm not in-house counsel.
Right.
But I've listened to enough and worked with enough over the years to spot issues of importance that I felt like they needed to have to talk about as a starting point. And as I've mentioned in on your show just now, I don't care if they take this book and they pick it up and go, this guy's an idiot. He didn't have any idea what he's talking about. If it gets the conversation started.
Well, you want to be that catalyst.
And that's right. Then my job is done with that. But, talking about the value of the perspectives. When I wrote this book, my goal was thinking, can this help establish some best practices? Can we learn best practices from this? And I came into it with my own ideas, preconceived ideas. And many of those I wrote in here, and not only would other people disagree with them, I would probably disagree with many of them now,
Right.
just having had these conversations. And before we were recording yours, we were talking about one issue that I talk about on here a lot is reporting, reporting structure for the CISO.
Right.
And, I've had people talk about, hey, I want to report through legal for whatever reason. I've had people say, oh, no, I wouldn't want to report through legal for their reasons. You've talked about this with a lot of folks. What are your perspectives on this?
Yeah, so I've found now keep in mind, this is ascientific.
Yeah, well, everything we're doing.
Everything we're doing.
Yeah.
But again, a general consensus of folks that I've talked to that have been on the show and off, by the way. So I do talk to a lot of folks off the show. Not everybody can come on. Also try to give time and place for folks to do that. But I've found that the people with the most challenge are the ones that report to the CIO. And the folks that seem to be the most satisfied with where they report tend to be counsel or CFO. Very few report to the CEO. And I can honestly say that I'm very fortunate in that because I report to the CEO, but that was part of the conditions that I put forth in coming in the door. And not that I was like holding a big stick or anything. It was more of a, you guys need to do this because, you need to separate these two functions. But in the end, the CIO role with the CISO reporting to is a very big challenge, and it's not impossible. There's some that have great relationships. Don't get me wrong, because I think about those folks as well. But again, on the whole, the challenge being you are someone that's trying to place controls on another person or another leadership role that has another set of success criteria, and that has its own friction. Now, you're going to have that friction even if you report outside, but imagine going in for your review and coming in and saying, you're going to get judged on your performance. You really screwed
this up.
Right, exactly. So I think there's a natural conflict that comes with that. And I think folks can work through it, but I think there's a lot of it that's unavoidable. And so when I hear folks, some of these folks that report into CIOs, that's the challenge, is you're always the bearer of bad news. You're always contrary to his or her org mission statement. And that's a natural conflict that you really can't just say we're going to manage out of.
Yeah. David, you mentioned something to me that is really, really important about that process. When I was writing the section on reporting structures, I spent some time researching to try to find what are best practices, what are the most common. I couldn't find anything really compelling that said this is right, this is wrong. Partially because it all depends, right? It depends on structure, organization, all this. But one of the things that I've found is nobody knows what's necessarily right or wrong. A lot of times companies are just doing things because that's the way they've been done, and they don't know whether it's valuable or not. But having that conversation, like you had coming in to talk about that issue, enlighten them. And that's what we need.
Well, there's another pattern that I've seen as well, which is, as a general rule, and again, it's the concept of the show, but it's also, I think in talking with so many folks, it has proven out that we are a young executive role. I always tell folks, I feel like we're sitting in this awkward teenage years where we really don't know, can't define ourselves. We don't know who we are, right? We're on that journey. And we have the ability to
puberty.
It's CISO puberty. Yeah, exactly. for lack of a better way to put it. But you move that forward and you say, okay, well, if we're finding ourselves, it's hard to walk into a room and say, well, this is what we're about. And it's not just what I'm about. So what I'm seeing in those that are highly successful, and I can think of at least 4 or 5 in my mind right now, it's them as an individual executive, really kind of divorced from being a CISO or being a cybersecurity expert. It's a general business executive that happens to have a cybersecurity expertise in their background, similar to a good CFO, COO, people like that, yes, you may have come from finance, but in the end, if you're a good business executive, you may wind up going up the chain relative to, where you're at. And so I think that's one of the big keys, is to say, okay, are you striving to be a good general business executive? Because you're going to get more opportunities, and you're going to, that reporting mechanism will change based upon that more than anything right now. Mm-hmm. Now, as we get better as a group, as we make our way through puberty, and find out who we really are and what we really want to be, what type of executive we want to be. Obviously, there's the risk idea, there's the business executive, there's the do we stay technical. I mean, I've had those conversations with people. Like, people are like, you have to maintain your technical acumen to the point of writing code. And I'm like, I don't know, right? What do we want to be?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's so fascinating, because what you're referring to, we go through this in legal, right? As the baby associate, the baby lawyer, you got to know every detail of every case, every element, every piece of fact, and you're the person that delves into the weeds the deepest. And as you mature through the practice, you become less tactical and more strategic.
Right.
And you have to start seeing the bigger picture and understanding not just the objectives of a case, which usually still win, but not always, not at all costs.
Right.
I didn't learn that until much later in my career, that not everybody's willing to pay everything for a win. Sometimes an efficient loss is better than an inefficient win.
Right.
And then you mature from not just understanding the client's objectives for your case, but for their whole business, their whole operations, maybe even an industry.
Broader context.
Yeah.
Right.
And when I think about the roles of a CISO, it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's great if you can maintain that technical acumen, but I've never seen a scenario where the board or the senior executive leadership are critiquing a CISO for not doing that.
Change is hard. Human beings always go back to what they know best
Yeah.
when it's uncomfortable. So do you seek the discomfort in becoming that generalized executive, right? I would love to see a CISO that becomes a CEO and not of a cybersecurity company.
Yeah.
Right? I think we have a unique view on the world because we lay across everything. We have a better understanding of most business, across all of the business lines and all the business areas than most any other executive, if you pay attention and you make that a concerted effort to build yourself as that general executive.
Just like legal. And that's the similarities between the legal role and the security, the CISO role, or the parallels are so profound, because it's the same way. You lay across the whole organization, but we have many people in legal that love their subject matter. Mm-hmm. They love digging into the weeds, and that's their comfort zone. They're great at compliance and things like that.
Yeah.
But I feel like you're right in that if a CISO is willing to broaden their horizons, they're going to be really well positioned for that. But see, that's hard because you got a day job.
Right.
Yeah,
and a day job is highly demanding. Again, I say 4 or 5, but now it balloons up to 8 to 10 of folks that I know that I've had on the show, as well as others that I know are doing it right. And again, they've been promoted and or they're running areas of an organization based upon their acumen as a general business executive more than just being a CISO. And so when that comes, it's a different conversation. And I think, again, I'll go back to my judgment around the other cybersecurity podcast. The challenge there is we have a lot of talk around we need to do better. We need a seat at the table. We need. Well, when do we take it upon ourselves,
Yeah.
right? To say, okay, and I know there's people out there trying to define it. My show is just one of those avenues. Again, it's the idea of the one to many. We gild very well, right? We at old night times, right? You bring people together and it's one to few. Conferences still one to few, even the big conferences. But if you're getting out there reaching 20,000 people a week or more, that now maybe we can start changing some ideas, right? And we have a broader spectrum by which we can go and say, look, I'm seeing these patterns, and oh, by the way, I need to develop myself in the direction of being expertise in cybersecurity, but a great business executive as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is so valuable because, we're not taught these skills in our daily job, or even, even a lot of the mentoring we get. I manage our office here in Plano for our law firm, and when we're training our younger attorneys, we're training them how to write better, how to read better, how to analyze better, how to argue better. We're not necessarily thinking about how do you broaden yourself as your understanding of business so you can understand your clients better. And I think when we can play a role in that,
100%.
That's really, really valuable.
Anybody that I actually just had a mentorship phone call the other night, yesterday afternoon, and it was somebody looking to get in cybersecurity. And I tried to explain in the context of if you think you're going to sit into a cube and look at these tools and just lights down,
just geek out,
that's not the role anymore. I mean, even at the lower levels, yes, you're going to be tool heavy, but in the end, I mean, I heard more recently, close because it's a family member. Part of the criteria was you have to be able, to get hired was you have to go out and be able to work inside the organization across your level.
Yeah.
Right, and understand the business, and that's where it's going, right? And I think, like anything else, again, we've got to make it through puberty. We have to make it through this evolution to where now we are not there for technology's sake. We're not there for control's sake. We're not there for ones and zeros. We're there for the business sake. All these other things are just a tool to get there. It's a protection tool. It's a risk management tool.
And the fundamental principle behind that is leadership.
100%.
Because the only way you can rise to that more strategic level is if you've got the team behind you that's effectively doing the tactical.
And all these people that I talk about, the 8 to 10 or whatever, they are all great leaders, like truly to the person. So that's the other aspect. So if you're not studying leadership as well, and whatever avenue that looks like, that's a big piece of it. So it's getting people to do the things that you want them to do in concert with minimal friction.
Yeah.
Right. And understanding what that looks like and leading that team to do so. So yeah.
And being able to delegate and trust and not micromanage.
Yes.
And not be aloof.
Right.
But not be micromanaging.
Correct.
That's
An engaged leader
really hard.
is an effective leader, but at the same time, not so much. I mean, I work very hard in my role to make sure that my team is ready for the next level. I even tell them directly. I'm like, okay, this is one that you go put on your resume.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are like, well, wait a minute, no, I don't want to get rid of them. But at the same time, I want them. What's in it for me, right? They want to know how they're progressing, and to be able to say that you've independently run a SOC 2 all by yourself as an information security manager, that's a big deal, right? Yeah. And so that's just an example, but that's what the approach, like give enough and then be a consultant to them when they have troubles, because they're going to have troubles. They've never done it before.
Yeah. That's so important. I struggled with this several years back with leading my team, as I was a micromanager, and I became the bottleneck. And I had to learn how to trust and mentor and oversee, and it was a struggle.
Yeah.
Because I've always prided myself on how well I can do all of this stuff, but at some point you can't do it all.
From a military taught me this one, Marine Corps that has it in the Army and as well, and then others, but commander's intent, now I call it leader's intent for the civilian world, is the idea of, can you paint that picture well enough on the other side? It's also a covey, start with the end in mind, right? But the idea is paint that picture of how you want the outcome to be, give your people, empower them, and allow them to be creative in how they get it done. Do not penalize them for how creative they are.
Yeah.
In the end, did it get done? Did it get done in the intent and what you wanted it to? Yes. Then don't. The sausage is made, man.
Yeah,
Sausage is made.
and David, the turning point for me was listening to Jocko Willink's
Oh yeah,
book.
Jocko's been formative.
Where he's talking about decentralized command,
Yeah.
and exactly what you just described, that commander's intent, and understanding they're going to go do it their way,
Right.
and it may not be exactly like you wanted it, but if it's not wrong,
Right.
then you have to allow them that freedom, because that's how they grow.
That's how they grow. Yeah, and I think,
And that's how
you got
they
they got to
buy
take the
in.
knocks. That's the other part.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a saying in the Marine Corps: you're either going to be smart or you're going to be strong. And you can't avoid letting your team get strong if they need to get strong.
Yeah.
And that sounds trite maybe a little bit, but in the end, it's like, okay, you may have to try a couple different times, but give them that, as long as it's not a fatal failure,
Yeah.
it's okay, right? Now, set the expectations above, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
And of course, we're in like a zero tolerance, for cybersecurity. You have to be very measured on how you do it, but in the end, if there's some wiggle room, allow them to get strong.
Yeah.
Because in the end, they're just going to be stronger and smarter.
Yeah, that's right. And you're going to
Or
be better.
self-eliminating.
Yeah, well, maybe so, but you're going to find out sooner rather than later.
Exactly.
Well, David, it may come as no surprise, but we have reached the end here today,
great
and I
time.
know we could continue talking about this all day, and I have just enjoyed our conversation so
Same.
much. Really appreciate you being on the
Well,
show.
thank you for having me. It's been
And-
a pleasure, and it's amazing to see what you're doing. I think taking this thread and running it down the way you are, similar to the way that I am, I think it's invaluable, and I look forward to the growth and learning that I get from you in what you're putting out.
The same here, same here.
Love it.
So thank you. Thank you all for tuning in and watching the show. I promise I'm going to get better with these endings at some point, but for now, that's all we got. So thank y'all and look forward to next time.